warm welcome to the OOH lunch break, where we deep dive into conversations with key industry leaders. And today I am very thrilled to chat with Maryam Banikarim, and I know you all are too. Maryam is a well-known marketing and media powerhouse, and she's the brand new head of marketing for Nextdoor, the red hot neighborhood-focused proximity platform. One of my favorite products, I must say. Maryam has spent 25 years in marketing, managing global brands and teams. And before Nextdoor, she was Global Chief Marketing Officer of Hyatt Hotels. And prior to Hyatt, Maryam was CMO of Gannett. She also sits on Adweek's Women Trailblazers Council Board, Fast Company's Impact Council, and is the US Board Chair of Reporters Without Borders. And today we're going to talk about Nextdoor, the super popular hyperlocal social platform that has brought neighbors together in 11 countries around the world. This is especially relevant to our business since 70%, or almost 70% at least, of out of home is local. And if you ever use Nextdoor, you should be a huge fan. It does help foster communities and communication in a whole new way. And as you can imagine, in the situation we're in right now, Nextdoor has exploded in popularity, neighborhood by neighborhood. So let's find out what Nextdoor let's find out how and why Nextdoor and out of home are perfectly aligned as proximity matters, and how both out of home media owners and brands can benefit. Just so you know, before I start, this whole conversation, a lot of questions we're going to be asking have been informed by a lot of the questions and comments that you've sent to us previous to this webinar. So I'm very glad that this is an interactive webinar even from the start. Thanks for being here, Maryam.
Thank you so much for having me, Anna. I'm really glad to be joining you guys.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you. And like I said before, and I think I said in the intro throughout, so are our members. We've had a lot of very positive comments about this webinar. So very exciting to have you here. I usually start these conversations with finding out a little bit more about your personal life right now, as we're in a quite strange situation, to say the least. So what neighborhood have you been calling home these past 6 months?
So I would say for us, a combination of Chelsea and Manhattan, where we've lived for 20 odd years, and then a little bit of Connecticut, where we sort of took a little break for the summer to get a little bit of a reprieve from the heat, but not to get too far from the city because we go back and forth still.
That's good. So you're not leaving the city?
Oh no, we're definitely not leaving the city. I think New York is, a state of mind, and it's really about the people. And so I consider that home. And so even when I moved to Chicago for my 4 years at Hyatt, we never sold the house because we knew that New York was home. So we're diehards.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm diehard too. Even though I do live in the burbs, I'm one of those who really support and hope that New York will come back fast. So I'm glad to hear that you're staying. But speaking of the pandemic, can you tell us a little bit about how the pandemic has affected you most profoundly, outside of the fact that you have been sort of commuting between homes?
Yeah. So, I think for me, I took this job on February 3rd. So my first week was spent at headquarters in San Francisco. My second week, besides marketing, I also oversee our global business. And so I spent my second week in the UK, and then my third week in the New York office in Chelsea, actually not walking distance from my home. And then we went to work from home. So I had 3 weeks before our new normal. And, it's a very different way of living. I spent most of my time, you can imagine, particularly at Hyatt in the global role, I was always on a plane. And I really haven't been on a plane, since like early February. So a lot has changed. I think you do get to, I was actually saying to my husband, one of the habits I hope I retain when we get to the other side of this is morning walks. We actually go on a morning walk. And I noticed things even in Manhattan, like the tulips, which I was always just running past as I was going from one thing to the next. I think there's a lot of things that we're actually going to retain from this experience. And I can't wait for the time where we say, do you remember when? And yeah, it's coming. I know it's coming.
I agree fully with that. And I also agree on paying attention more to small details and people's backyards and things like that. So there are a lot of positive things in this too. And hopefully we'll really appreciate normalcy when it comes back one day. Let's talk a little bit about Nextdoor. Can you define it and tell us the origin? How did it come about?
Sure. The thing that's interesting about Nextdoor is that there was an article that Charles Blow, the opinion columnist for the New York Times, wrote about how as we have become more connected, actually 28% of neighbors, this was a Pew study that had come out, didn't know a single one of their neighbors. And he just was sort of startled by that statistic. I think one of the founders read that article, came back to sort of the team that was thinking about ideas. And then they read a book called Bowling Alone that talked about the same phenomenon, that as society has sort of evolved, we've become more disconnected, right? And so when you think of a city, your unit is attached to your next door neighbor. As you become more suburban, you're further apart, right? And so as we become more connected through social media and lots of things that we have on the internet, people are increasingly feeling more isolated. And so the founding idea was really, how do we use technology to connect people, with the idea of actually connecting them in person so that they did in fact know their physical neighbors. So that was really the founding idea of Nextdoor. It really grew up community based. So a neighbor would want to open a Nextdoor sort of in their community, and so they would invite neighbors, and sort of was very community generated. And I think the idea, and the research now shows, that the more you actually are connected to people within your community, and they actually call them weak ties, because it's not your best friend, but Joe, who you know from the coffee shop, or the name of the guy at the butcher, right? The more connected you are in that way, the more you actually feel happier and healthier in your life. And so that was really the impetus for Nextdoor. It was a way to connect you to what is proximal to you. And I think of neighbors not just as Nathaniel and Troy, who live down the block from me, but also as Stefan, who runs La Bergamote, the coffee shop, to obviously the police station and the services, and even the Home Depot, right? So big box businesses, small businesses, your physical neighbors, the government services, the school, sort of the neighborhood hub, if you would. And that's really what Nextdoor is meant to enable.
Yeah, it is an incredible, I will say, I use it, and I'm not just saying this because we're having this conversation, but I've used it a lot. It's been a great help for me during the pandemic in situations where you couldn't get a hold of a handyman or in a normal way, or find out more information about what's going on in the town. I guess in my town, people are very active on Nextdoor, so it's been an amazing help. And to your point, it's a different type of social network, and very useful one. You feel connected even if you're isolated, as we have been. It's very, very cool. But we talked about this when we prep call too. This is something that I'm particularly interested in because I am new at my job, but I feel like a veteran if I compare to you. You joined Nextdoor February 3rd, as I think you just said. And in a matter of weeks, all of our lives changed forever and nothing was the same again. What was Nextdoor's initial response to the pandemic in your first days as CMO, and how did you deal with the whole situation?
So, I think Nextdoor is a purpose-driven company, and I think, they've done some work to uncover their purpose, which I really consider a North Star for a business, right? Like, what is the difference you're trying to make in the world beyond just making money? Like, what's the intersection of you making money and what you're good at, and what the change you want to make in the world? And Nextdoor's purpose is around cultivating kindness and creating neighborhoods that we can all rely on. I always understood, like, when I would look at that line, I always thought, like, oh, utility, I get, right? Like, you come in for the utility. I need a handyman. I need a babysitter. I need somebody to recommend something to me. I was like, what is the kindness thing? Well, I can tell you 3 weeks in, when COVID hit, the first thing we did as a business was we were focused on getting you hyper local, relevant, trusted information, right? We're not the source, but we're the enabler. So working with the CDC, the World Health Organization, the NHS, and the UK to make sure that you were getting trusted information that you really vitally needed. In short order, it immediately started happening on the platform. And you really saw this globally. People started showing up wanting to help each other. If there's a silver lining to the pandemic, I have to say, and in times of difficulty, kindness does show up. And that's really when I began to sort of see that part of the purpose language show up. We had a 262% increase in members showing up on the platform wanting to help each other. 7 times the number of people wanted to join groups that were set up for helping neighbors, right? So that was really kind of amazing to see. Can I run to the grocery store because you're immunocompromised and you can't yourself, right? So how do I help my actual neighbor? And to your point earlier, what you saw was that people needed the people who were close to them to actually be the ones to help them, because, you know, I had people who would reach out to me and say, my mom, I live in the Bronx, I can't get into Chelsea. Is there a way you can help my mother who's like, you know, a few blocks from you, right? So that need of those who are closest to you actually became a really vital importance. So initially, I would say in the second week, we saw, you know, neighbors wanting to help each other. And the product team, like, you know, your purpose-driven company when people begin to like just around the clock work and generate new products to meet the need of neighbors. So the team immediately sort of mobilized, because it was life and death situation, right? This isn't sort of it's not a nice to have, it's a need to have. And so the team took something that had existed before. We had a map that basically allowed you for trick-or-treating purposes to pin your house in your neighborhood to say, you know what, I'm open for trick-or-treating. They took that and actually repurposed that map functionality so that you could pin yourself and say, I'm here and I'm offering to help. So that somebody could actually say, oh, I can find somebody who's willing to help me within 4 blocks, not 20 blocks, right? So that help map became like this really incredible thing. So besides the group functionality, so that you could easily find people who are either in need of help or who are offering help, but then also a visual tool so that you could actually get that help in the closest proximity to yourself. So I say, you know, a company's purpose-driven when people begin to work around the clock because they're living their purpose. And that's been one of the most amazing things to actually see, you know, something that you can think you know, but you don't know until you actually show up to a job.
Well, and what a great company to, I mean, it's especially, you know, in comparison to maybe Hyatt these days. I mean, you're really representing a platform that has it's probably an even bigger need for in a pandemic. So it must have been a good feeling when you found out I'm really at the right place at the right place at the right time. It's very, very cool.
You know, and it's funny, people think you have like a magic 8-ball. You know, the number of people who emailed me and said like, what good timing. And I thought to myself, well, that's funny. I guess I knew a pandemic was coming. You know, I wish I had that kind of foresight, you know, but I don't. It just happened that for me, I had sort of stepped away from a day job after I had left Hyatt, which, by the way, was also an amazing experience. And I wasn't really sure I would go back in for a job, but I inherently believe in like neighborhoods being a unit of change, right? And so when this opportunity showed up, it sort of aligned with sort of the things I inherently believe in. And so it wasn't, it didn't take much to convince me to, you know, decide to go back in, but it was reassuring actually to sort of find yourself being in a capacity where you could actually help, right? I think we all wanted to help, right? And so for me, working around the clock to actually make sure that people were getting what they needed was sort of a natural thing to step into.
Yeah, and it's very similar actually to the out-of-home industry. I mean, we early on focused in on helping, trying to help society too, and people around us. And what we at the OOH really has been exploring since this started, because things have changed, you know, radically. The world is different now. We've been very interested in how member companies and how brands have creatively managed through this times, new things, new innovations that have come just because of the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about how Nextdoor as a company and your, I guess your members have been showing creativity in this crisis?
I mean, there's all kinds of creativity that's showing up. I think, you know, it's not a coincidence that pressure times actually lead to creativity and innovation. Frankly, I have to say we were shipping product at record speed, like, you know, something that before this somebody might have said would have taken longer. People were just doing that. And you're hearing that across the business, right? People are saying, I was on a call the other day with somebody in the retail space and their brick and mortar is not doing great, but their digital business is like, you know, 7 times what it was. And so they've had to pivot and reinvent how they functioned and operated and a lot of their actual back-end businesses, right? And people are doing that. So you begin to see that, you know, innovation sort of is like the mother of invention, right? Like it, whatever that expression is, you're beginning to see that because we're living it. I think in terms of neighbors, you began to see people just doing things as simple as finding ways to celebrate their child's birthday in socially distant ways, right? I remember one of my favorite stories is like somebody was having a wedding in Brooklyn and you were not really able to actually have a wedding the way that most people would. And so they actually organized sort of their neighbors to come and celebrate the wedding with them. Or, you know, the number of stories I see on Nextdoor where somebody arranges for their 6-year-old loves Jeeps, and they post into Nextdoor and say, can you help my son celebrate his birthday? He loves Jeeps. And then like the Jeeps show up, you know, and do drive-bys, or a woman who dressed up as a taco and offered to drive by neighbors' homes, right? And so like you're just seeing unbelievable ways that people are showing up, and they can be small ways, they can be bigger ways where people are doing GoFundMe campaigns for businesses that are having a hard time. You know, in my local neighborhood in Chelsea, people started posting about supporting Murray's, our local bagel shop, and also sort of suggesting that you could actually buy bagels to send to essential workers at the hospital at the same time, right? So people are really showing up in a way that's quite altruistic, but also super inventive, right? I think you're also seeing people, when we started having some unrest, saying, I'm uncomfortable walking home, and posting on Nextdoor, like, would anybody be willing to walk home with me? And like we had Sean in Nashville, where, you know, 50 people showed up to walk Sean home. So it shows up in so many different ways. I mean, I think one of the things Adam Grant talks a lot about in his book, Giver and Takers, is that asking for help is actually giving somebody the opportunity to be helpful. And that's such a gift, actually, because you think it's not a gift, but it actually is a gift. And so when you ask someone for help, you're welcoming them to actually do the thing that also gives them joy. And you're seeing that actually show up, right? So I actually was rereading Adam's book because I was sort of struck by what was getting somebody to show up asking for help. And actually, you know, I say to my son sometimes, because, you know, sometimes your kids aren't as good at asking for help. I'm like, you're actually giving me a gift by asking me for help. It's not a burden.
No, you want to feel that you're needed. And I think especially in this situation, that it's not all about, you know, your pain and yeah, it's so true. And again, a lot of the things you're touching on is very similar to sort of what we've experienced as an industry and out of home. We talked a little bit about it, but I'm interested in, like, so we've always been performed as a public service medium, which has been great for our industry, really put us on the map. And you know, these big screens or smaller screens can really do mass broadcasting of emergency notices and natural disaster warnings, or campaigns about important issues such as, you know, washing your hands or whatever it may be. You at Nextdoor, you perform very similar services with safety alerts. So are you a public service or are you a business?
No, I mean, we're definitely a business, right? We're a business that's purpose driven. And so in that sense, you know, I think what motivates everybody is sort of like living your North Star of like, how do I actually cultivate kinder neighborhoods and give everybody neighborhoods they can rely on? So when you have that, it's actually easy to also do the public service because it's within the DNA of the organization, but we're a for-profit business, right? It's about that intersectionality, actually. I think it's important, you know, I would say all the time when I was talking to different marketers, it's not about pretty pictures now. It's about actually people are losing their lives, right? Like show up in meaningful ways that really make a difference. If that's really how you're showing up, that's what people are going to remember in the long run anyway. You know, you're not looking to make a quick buck. That's not really what it's about. It's really about long-term relationships. And frankly, I have to hand it to your industry. One of the things I so remember and will remember about the pandemic, when hopefully we're on the other side of it, is the incredible ads that I saw as I walked up and down 9th Avenue, right? Whether it was, you know, to your point about PSAs about wearing a mask, that you guys were, you know, participating in with the local government, or the campaigns that, you know, Cuomo ran, that Tribeca and folks did to suggest that people should wear a mask, to just the support, right? In terms of thanking essential workers. I mean, there were such, you know, you have a medium that actually allows like for amazing graphic design that is attention getting and super creative. And I spent a lot of time, you know, sharing pictures that I saw like that, you know, posting on my Instagram feed or Facebook or, you know, wherever, and my Nextdoor, you know, and I would post on Nextdoor constantly because I think there are some people who didn't get out, right? Joan, my neighbor, hasn't left her apartment since February. So I would take pictures and post them into the feed so that she could see what she couldn't see, you know, with her own eyes. But there was incredible creativity. One of my favorite outdoor pieces is somebody actually posted a story that got picked up about the I Love New York, you know, sign that was developed. And so after 9/11, the graphic designer who developed that modified it to say, I love New York more than ever. And actually that's been showing up all over New York. Now he passed away, but somebody had posted that in one of the grocery store windows, right? And then that got picked up by a West Side newspaper. And I just think it's so important, right, to actually give people not just messages, but also hope, right, that their city is going to survive and thrive. And so, yeah, I mean, you're a great message, but and a great public service at the same time.
Well, thank you for that. And of course we are also businesses just like you are, but it certainly does feel well. I'm sure for our members and for us as well as the AAA to be able to provide that service, and I think has gotten us sort of through this crisis as an industry too. You know, knowing that we're doing something that holds up morale and that's very good for society. But we've also, I mean, it's also important to help me talk a little bit about that. Businesses come back and we all thrive because businesses are also advertisers, right? So you have enormous reach and also proximity distribution. And the utility that you have at Nextdoor, where you share information about goods and services, I think have been invaluable for businesses and for consumers in this crisis. Certainly for me, both large and small ones, not just the very local ones. So can you talk a little bit more about how that is and what you did?
Yeah, so I mean, after the second or third week, people really did turn to try and help their local businesses, because we all know, right? Like our neighborhoods are vital because of the businesses, and they're vibrant because of the businesses that are in them. And so people started turning to how to help their local businesses, from posting things like, you know, the Bergamot is actually open and it's open for takeout, right? People were looking for really accurate information. And as people were in shelter in place, they left the home, but they were going out surgically. They didn't wander. So they wanted to know, like, if I have to go find Lysol wipes, where can I go find them, right? So we really turned to help our local businesses by enabling GoFundMe campaigns, by enabling takeout functionality, by having them be able to post. You got 2 free postings into the feed so that you could communicate directly to your neighbors, because neighbors wanted to hear from their local businesses. And one of the things that's different about Nextdoor is that you don't actually have to build up a following, right? In a lot of places online, you put up your website and then you have to go actually drive people to the website so they can get your message. When you post into Nextdoor, it's instant distribution to the people who are closest to you. And by the way, your neighbors want to help you and support you, because while they can do it out of their goodness of their own heart, they also know that it is actually like the value of their neighborhood, right, as well. And so we've been seeing incredible amounts of support for local businesses. And then we also started doing things. We have a carousel that's called For Sale and Free. It's basically a way for you to be able to, if you're Mary Kondoing your house or want to get rid of things, you can actually donate them, like give them away and say, you can come by and find them, or you can say, like, you know, I have a desk for sale for $100. And the nice thing about Nextdoor is that it happens within range of your location, right? So I don't want to go, you know, to a whole nother neighborhood to pick up a desk, but if it's only 10 blocks away, like that's an easy thing to get. So we basically did a partnership with a bunch of nonprofits where you can actually donate the proceeds of a sale that you generate on the For Sale and Free carousel to a nonprofit of your choice, right? A way to be able to actually participate in the revitalizing of your neighborhood through nonprofits, local nonprofits, which is another thing that has been doing phenomenally well for us.
And brands like traditional, I guess, larger brands, how do they work with Nextdoor? Can you give some examples?
Probably one of my favorite stories is the Walmart story, because they came in on the help map and the group functionality because, you know, they saw that that was an opportunity to get hyper local information. You needed to know that your local Walmart was open, what the hours were. And then what they did was they actually enabled groups. And so people could go into the group and say, I'm going to go do a Walmart run. I can actually do the run for you. So whether you were staying home because you were actually having to homeschool your kid, or you were immunocompromised, your neighbor who was going to Walmart could actually pick up goods for you. The reason I loved that was because it was like, it hit on so many different levels, right? It actually enabled Walmart to get neighbors to help each other, but it also enabled them to worry about the safety of their essential workers who were showing up, because it actually kept foot traffic down, but it kept basket sizes up, right? I mean, it was just like this amazing ecosystem that it was sort of solving for. You know, State Farm sponsors something that we do with them because it's such an organic fit, which is neighborhood favorites. So we run a campaign where you get to vote on who your neighborhood favorite business is. given State Farm's positioning, that was sort of a nice thing for them to come in on. And we're actually just, we alerted the winners of that. And so that's a campaign to help support like all those local businesses that we all love, right? By letting people know that they're your favorite. We actually did a partnership with, what was I going to say? With H&R Block, their positioning is every block matters. We all know that every block better is their positioning, and that every block does matter. So we partnered with them. So usually what would happen in that effort is we get nominations for community betterment projects, and then we actually show up in the neighborhood and actually activate on those. In a socially distant world, it's hard to actually activate some of those things. So we were able to pivot and work with 5 local businesses to actually sort of do this in a socially distant way. So like talk about innovation. So the team, one of them was like a community garden, for example. And so what they did was, in order to activate that community garden that had won, they identified 5 local businesses. So one that they could buy seeds from, one that they could buy tools from, and then they created kits and mailed them and figured out a way for people to actually visit the community garden in increments, to actually show up and actually do the gardening, which gave them an activity to get out of the house, but in a way that sort of blocked off time so people could do it in a socially distant way. I mean, these are kind of amazing things that brands are doing. And I have to say the team here has been pretty inventive at like reinventing the things that, we didn't have to do before. So you're seeing a lot of really interesting kinds of partnerships emerge on Nextdoor, and I'm sure everywhere.
It is fascinating in a sense how it feels now when you're thinking back 6 months ago, like how stale we were as an industry, how everyone were doing things exactly the same way. And now all of a sudden people really are very innovative. And again, talking about the good things that could come out of this crisis, I think it's amazing how we are rethinking things and being much more authentic in how we communicate with each other and with our customers. But there's so many similarities and I think also synergies between the out-of-home industry and Nextdoor as a company. And I'm sure a lot of the members of ours that are on the call now are very impressed and inspired by the stories we are telling, because it is so relevant to us, but also thinking about how we can work together. So how can media owners, or agencies for that matter, from our largest global outdoor companies to the smallest, very local players, work with Nextdoor?
So, I think like it's the advice I would give anyone, which is like focus on your customers and how you can solve their needs, right? It's about meeting the need of the neighbors. And so, look, we buy outdoor. We bought it before in different markets, and we're actually going to go into the market in 4 markets in the fall. Everyone's trying to figure out how they can move the needle, right? We all know that everyone's still in the same boat. And so we're going to run pre and post tests. We're going to try and see if it lifts not just awareness, but also actually we're going to have control markets to see if it's actually bringing more people into the platform. Think about how you can partner with your various clients. And I would say also think about how you can actually, what I love is seeing all that PSA work, because you're reminding people what a great medium you are while doing good, right? And so the innovation that people are seeing like reminds them of why you're such a great medium. And by the way, you are the medium that people are experiencing. So, I think the other thing I was actually thinking about telling your member base is that there is this perception out there that people are leaving big urban markets. And that's not actually true. It's just like the headlines that are attention grabbing. And you actually have that, right? So when we were looking at where to, what markets to consider and go into, the media team pulled from me sort of information about New York, for example, as a market. And they were like, foot traffic in New York is up 70% to what it was pre-COVID levels. Transit, driving, and walking, right? So like having that kind of data, because you don't know that people's perceptions of what they're hearing from their friends isn't the thing that's actually influencing their decision making. Remember to go back to the data and pull the facts. People are still using transit in cities like New York. Driving is at an all-time high, right? Because it's a socially distant way to get around places. People are still walking. Guess what? They're driving by the units that you're selling, right? And so pulling that data and making sure that that's top of mind. Frankly, if I was in your shoes, I would be making sure that I was sharing that kind of statistic and information about the markets pretty aggressively to actually counter the storyline that people are leaving, and so they're not going to see the signage that you guys are selling, because that's not actually true, right? It may be the people that we know, but it's not the majority of America. And actually, you know, as my media buyer was saying, you know, a lot of the outdoor we're buying are digital, right? And so you're also like able to actually follow people. So just remember to go back to sort of those points. Yeah. And, you know, people are pretty anxious and triggered. We're all humans, right? And so it's important to actually just go back to the data and like retell the story. Because remember, people are scared because we can barely figure out how to plan for the next quarter, much less for the next year. So going back and actually making sure people actually are seeing the full story. And by the way, you guys know what that story is. You have access to that data to actually make sure that people actually have a real sense of what in fact is happening.
Yeah, no, that is very true. And we certainly are, you know, very focused on that. It has been for the industry. I mean, I think the only thing that potentially could stop out of home, at least in other people's eyes, would be a global pandemic, right? Because otherwise it's such a powerful medium, but if people are not leaving their houses, how are they going to see our screens? But fact of the matter is that they do. They just do it in a different way. So I think for us to continuously prove that is important. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm glad that you're saying it, because I think it's something that we're thinking about, and we should just keep, and we are doing it to a certain extent. We should do it more. And, you know, think about how out of home also is such a good fit with other forms of media, amplify messages.
You know, and I go back to my own experience when we were really in the lockdown phase in New York, right? We were in Chelsea, and while I didn't necessarily go out a lot during big swaths of the day, I mean, you have to get out, right? I mean, if you actually have the ability to get out, you still get out, right? And so we would do morning walks, right? I would go to the grocery store first thing in the morning. I was always still getting out, right? That's how I saw sort of a lot of this amazing out-of-home advertising that I'm mentioning to you, because there wasn't a day that I didn't leave the house at all. Now, I was fortunate in that I wasn't immunocompromised, so I could at least do that. And I would pick windows of time where the city was less crowded. So I think giving people sort of that visibility into as much as possible, right? The data about where the footfall is happening. Is it in windows, right? It's not like, I mean, I think that's sort of the data that I would go back to. So I do think that it's important to remind people of that.
Yeah, no, again, I couldn't agree more. Luckily, we do think or see that most of, well, when it comes to driving, definitely, but a lot of the traffic is back, and I think data is always king. So I think for us to use the programs that we have is incredibly important. So I have to ask you more of a personal question again. So I am Swedish, and I've lived in a few places in the world, but I'm not even close to as global a citizen as you are. You were, I think, born in Iran, and then you moved to the US when you were 12. And then you've called many places home. You've lived in London, you've lived in Paris, Argentina, Brazil, now New York. I mean, first of all, how did you have time to do all this? And then with someone like you, why is local neighborhoods so important?
So it's true. I've been fortunate that, you know, I've had the opportunity to live in a lot of places. I mean, it started because there was a revolution in Iran, you know, so sometimes life overtakes you. You know, for me, like, I believe that like your local neighborhood is like the thing that you're connected to, right? And for me, even when I moved into Chelsea 20 years ago, you know, my family made fun of me. I joined the Block Association and became the Block Association secretary. I inherently believe that it matters to participate. And so it was amazing because we moved into the neighborhood. I joined the Block Association as a secretary. I organized a block party at the park. It gave me a way to connect sort of exactly like what I'm talking about to the people who were closest to me. And it gave me a view in. That block association in New York is the longest running block association in the history of New York. I mean, Chelsea has changed dramatically, right? But it was amazing to connect to people who lived there before all that change. I always sort of knew that mattered. I mean, I think I grew up, you know, being in Iran, people are pretty connected to their family and their neighbors. And I think sort of, I always loved that. And so, you know, I do think that neighborhood is the unit of change, regardless of how global we become. You know, when I go back to Paris or Buenos Aires, I still go back to the neighborhood I lived in, right? Like you still have that need to be rooted into the ground. And so, you know, I think those two things are not diametrically opposite. Like I could want to be in touch with my friends in other parts of the world, but also have this incredible need to be rooted in the ground. We just did some research, incidentally, to better understand our core customers as well as our prospects. And what's interesting is how people are beginning to use like physical earth terms, like the need to be plugged in physically into like the earth is like something that you're hearing a lot in terms of people talking about, whether like bird watching in the trees or the tulips or whatever it is. And I think about local, you know, one of the things about local is that like we all have neighborhood hubs, right? It's like a source of energy. The farmers market, it's not just about goods and services, but it's also like an energy source, right? When you understand what is actually happening in your neighborhood and having access to that. And I think for us, that's really the insight. It's about how people want to feel plugged into their neighborhood and have access to like what's there, and they can participate in that however they want, but knowing that they have access, that's really what Nextdoor is about, right? So whether it's getting the plumber's number or knowing that a restaurant's change or the hours or whatever it is, it's like you want to have access to that. And by the way, those aren't always your best friends, but they are your neighbors.
Yeah, and I mean, I can actually, I haven't thought about that, but as an immigrant myself, you know, and have been moving around a little bit, I do think that neighborhood is probably even more important when you're new to a country or new to a city, like to feel that you belong somewhere. You don't have your family. It's not that given environment that you're in that you may be born into. So that's interesting. Maybe that's why I like mixed source.
100%. I mean, people have relocated in the pandemic, Anna, and I think that's one of the things I hear from people, right? They go into another neighborhood and they don't have the same connective tissue that they did in the other neighborhood, and they still need to find things, right? And
well, it's very hard, right? I mean, we have plenty of new neighbors living in suburbia here who are completely new to the town, and the kids can't go to school and they can't really go out and shake people's hands. So how do you form connection? Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, one of the things I hear all the time is how people are, you know, comparing notes on how to do homeschooling, which a lot of people are now having to do. How do they set up little pods where they can feel safe to actually get their kids to connect to each other, right? There's all kinds of things you actually need. And if you're new, or if like the Pew Research says, you don't know a lot of your neighbors, like you need that connective tissue, right? And I mean, I'm always amazed at what people are posting into my Nextdoor feed from, you know, actually before the pandemic, a woman posted into my feed that she was Brazilian, she was 50, she lived in Greenwich Village, and she just wanted to make some new friends. She had like 140 comments of people telling her about like book groups, meditation groups, and then 23 of them gathered for coffee at Lemmy D, right? So this need to be connected is a real human need, right? And I think that's what you're basically discovering.
Yeah. So I want to ask you a few quick questions here, and for shorter answers. But I think we're all wondering, and you know, like many businesses have had a struggle in the pandemic, but I'm sure you've experienced pretty explosive growth. So what does the growth look like in the past 6 months? Can you share some numbers?
From February to March, we had active users go up 80%. As I mentioned to you, 262% increase in terms of people talking about helping each other, like wanting to help each other, right? 17% increase in terms of conversations around people wanting to help their local businesses. I mean, it's really phenomenal what you're seeing.
And what was the usage of these people before, and how much do they use it now? Can you see a change in how much they interact?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think one of the things we've seen is we've had people who were on the platform who weren't as active become active because you have the need. You have a lot more new people who've come onto the platform, and then just usage of the platform. Because guess what? When you're stuck at home and you actually are in need of local information, it's definitely a resource. And I think our hope is that habit, that we become a daily habit that you retain.
And it's true. So with that in mind, do you have any new products on the horizon that we can expect?
Well, I mean, there's new products coming all the way. One of the ones that I think I mentioned to you, which is the for sale and free functionality, which we've adopted now to actually help nonprofits. I think we're going to be iterating that to help schools, right? So actually working with local schools to figure out how people can sell things from their home and actually benefit the school that might need resources, right? So we're evolving some of those programs, but there's new things coming out all the time, right? As we go towards elections on Nextdoor, really people talk about local politics. If they want to talk about national politics, they sort of do that in a group, but thinking through civil discourse and how you actually keep that, you know, in the right tone is something we're very focused on, right? One of the things that we actually had launched on the product, which I just think is so fascinating, is something called the kindness reminder. So if you're writing something and the AI sort of recognizes that you might be saying something that might not be in the right tone, it sort of gives you a reminder. We call it the kindness reminder, to just slow you down for a second to say, are you sure you want to say that in the way that you're saying? So one of the things we're going to be evolving is like sort of as you near the election cycle, like how do you actually slow people down so they're more mindful about how they show up? Because in the end, we all want to have neighborhoods that, you know, that we are proud of, that are inclusive and diverse and allow for differing opinions. Because remember, on Nextdoor, you don't pick and choose your friends. You're connected to those who literally live near you, right? And so those are things to be mindful of.
Yeah, you should. I think you should keep that functionality after the election too.
Well, the kindness reminder is there. It just keeps evolving to allow for the conversations that are happening.
Well, we were just talking before, I had issues with my neighbors doing yard work, right? And it's so easy to snap, right? So it's good to think about what you're, even when it's not about politics or something big. That's a great function. I'm going to use it. So we talked a little bit about it before, but I still, you know, I want to probe a little bit more into your view on out of home as a chief marketing officer, not just, you know, in your function at Nextdoor. You have a million choices every day when you're thinking about marketing. When do you think of deploying out of home?
Well, like I said, in the fall, we're doing this 4-market rollout, and we definitely have outdoor in the mix. Where I've used it also in the past, when we rebranded USA Today at its 30th anniversary, we did a lot of out of home, right? We did it for the trade because you could actually hyper target sort of where agencies were, right? And actually get the message in front of them. We did billboards, we did in subway advertising, we did Grand Central. I mean, you know, it sort of depends on what your message is. As you all know, how you message an outdoor sometimes is different because, you know, it's a broadcast vehicle. Of course, if it's digital, you get to, right, you have to think of the medium when you're developing the creative, but there's many times, right? And I think one note I can tell you, because I still I'm connected to lots of other CMOs and still do some advisory work, everyone is focused on hyperlocal. And so the thing you have is that, right? Because everybody realizes that getting information at a hyperlocal level is going to be critical for the foreseeable future. And so that's something that you have that, you know, is unique, and in the same way that it is for us. And I think that knowing that that's top of mind for all marketers, and figuring out how to be relevant, and also, you know, just reminding them of the data and why it matters, I think is a definite differentiator for you.
Yeah, well, we think out of home should be part of every campaign, of course. We think that that's that little extra that will make, or not little necessarily, but that will make the campaign even more successful. But I hear you, and it's really good to hear. And I think we should take that to heart as an industry, as the world is also in a different place right now. But in your 25-year career, you know, not just at Nextdoor and Hyatt, you've run a lot of campaigns. What's the best? When have you said the best effective out of home in what you've done?
I mean, probably the one that just comes to mind for me, a lot of it is USA Today, because that campaign was very visual. So it really worked nicely. You know, it was such a colorful campaign. It just sort of like, it worked really nicely, and it was really, really effective. I think knowing who you're trying to reach, and that the ability to hyper target them with a message that really worked in that medium, it's probably the most memorable one for me. But you know what? I don't want to look back. I'm going to say the campaign that's coming in the fall. That's going to be the one that's going to be the best.
I think so too.
We'll see.
We'll make sure to follow that one. So when you were at Hyatt, you helped position the giant hotel brand as purpose driven, and you put the guest in the center of all of their businesses. So you're known as a very purpose driven CMO. What does that mean? And does all brands have to be purpose driven now? What makes it real?
Look, I mean, I discovered purpose when I worked at Univision, thanks to Jerry Parencio and Roy Spence. I think of purpose in the vein of Jim Collins. Like, purpose is about the North Star of a business. And then my job as a marketer is to figure out how I take that purpose and use it to inform my marketing decisions. But purpose is about sort of what you're trying to do, the difference that you're trying to make in the world. And frankly, Jim Collins often talks about how it's the thing that helps you stay the course, particularly in times of turmoil or times of chaos like we're living today, because it helps you remain steady versus sort of respond to environmental changes and change your direction all the time, right? It's really about strategy. And so, no, not everybody recognizes that, but I think he's done a lot of he's done an amazing amount of body of work that shows that purpose-driven companies outperform. Jim Stengel is another person who's done a lot of analysis on that. I inherently believe in that idea. I think when you can find that intersection of what you're best at in the world, the difference you can make and how you can make money, it actually is incredibly motivating internally for the employee base. And I can just say, like, people were shipping code and product like around the clock, but they felt like they were making a difference and they were living the purpose. People come to Nextdoor because they inherently believe in neighbors and neighborhoods as a unit of change. So there's something, to the point we had before, that feels good about that. Yeah. So for me, that matters. Like, people used to say to me, oh, you can be in sales, you can sell anything. I was like, no, I inherently have to believe and care about what I'm selling. So it's not the same thing for me. So yeah, I've been fortunate. I discovered purpose at Univision, and then I've been able to do purpose work ever since. Turns out it's good to have a lane.
I mean, for sure. And it's very good. Like, again, to good for you and good for Nextdoor, right? A really great product at these times. And again, thinking about purpose, which I think is more important than ever right now, in so many ways. So what's next for Nextdoor? Where would you like the platform, or love the platform, to go, I should say, in your absolutely wildest dreams? Where do you see Nextdoor going?
I mean, I'd like us to become a daily habit. In my ideal world, in beyond even the 11 markets that we're in today, I would like people to wake up and say, like, I want to know what's going on in my neighborhood. And the first thing they check on as a way to check in on their neighborhood ecosystem is to check in on Nextdoor, right? To get a pulse of what's happening and feel plugged in. Becoming a daily habit like that, while we're big, we still have a ways to go in terms of awareness and usage. And I think that to become ubiquitous like that would be any marketer's dream or any business person's dream, right?
Yeah, well, for sure. Well, I'm definitely one of your, I guess, favorite users in that case, because I do, like I said before, use it a lot, and have felt, all the things you've touched on here through the crisis have been very, very useful to me, especially someone like me who's not at home a lot normally and don't really, think about those kinds of things.
I'm right there with you. Like, some days I'm like, I never leave this room.
I know. Tell me about it. Well, yeah, here we are. Everyone can recognize this room who's on this call. All right. Well, Maryam, this has been an amazing conversation and really, really, really inspiring, I think, for me and for everyone on the call. We always, in these webinars, try and end at a positive note. So I just want to, end on, if you could leave us with one encouraging and enlightening, Maryam, Banikarim ism. It's a hard one to say. What would that be?
Well, I'm going to borrow a purpose equation, because my old CEO at Hyatt loved a good equation. He used to say empathy plus action equals care. I see that you're in need and I actually do something about it. That's what care is. And I think that that's what the world is all about today, right? Empathize, but actually be willing to do something about it, because that's what we all need. And that's the difference we can all make. I'm a huge fan of outdoor. I think you guys have done amazing stuff. If I'd love taking pictures of all the great things I'm seeing. And so, there's nothing more hyperlocal than what you do. And so, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Keep taking those pictures and keep sharing them. We love that. And above all, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a real treat. The whole thing was actually very positive. I walk away from this very happy that I'm sitting in this room doing this thing right now. So
send me all the data about how all the great cities, Chicago, send it to me. I'm happy to amplify that, because I think there's a misperception that we should all really work to
we have tons of data that we will share with you, and please share them with the CMOs in your community too.
Exactly. I'm happy.
So I'll follow up with you on that one. But Maryam, huge thanks. Thanks to everyone who listened. We're taking a short little summer break with the lunch break series for 2 weeks now, but we're looking forward to seeing you back in September. And again, thank you, Maryam, and have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.